Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Old Schwamb Mill's April virtual event. My name is Ed Gordon, Director of Old Schwamb Mill Programs. The Good as Gold program this evening is the first of 3 programs funded by the Bridge Street Fund via Mass Humanities. The Bridge Street Fund sponsors free online programs hosted by Massachusetts Historical Societies, museums, and historical sites, helping these institutions recover lost income and enabling access to the humanities. The Old Schwamb Mill is a living history museum in Arlington, Massachusetts, where picture frames have been made for since 1864, continuing to be made to this day. The Old Schwamb Mill's April talk is entitled Good as Gold, the Process of Gold Leafing a Frame. Our speaker this evening is William B. Adair of the Washington, D.C. based Gold Leaf Studios. He is a frame conservator, frame historian, and master gilder. He began his career in frame conservation at the Smithsonian Institution's National Portrait Gallery. He has curated several shows on picture frames, including The Frame in America, 1700 to 1900, which was sponsored by the American Institute of Architects back in 1983. And he is the founding director for the International Institute for Frame Study, a nonprofit archive, and is a founding member of the Society of Gilders. Mr. Adair holds a Bachelor of the Arts in studio art degree from the University of Maryland. So without further ado, here is William Adair.
Thank you. It's really a great pleasure to be here tonight, especially since I started off my study of frame history with a seminar when I worked for the Smithsonian, a seminar at the Old Schwamb Mill given by Jerry Cohn, who was the curator of prints from the Fogg University, introduced me to the idea that there's a history of frames. So it's really a great pleasure to be back here lecturing to your group about the long history of frames. We have the Schwamb Mill, which is, of course, as Ed said, a living monument to the history of frame making. And it has a great deal of, what can I say, but it has a great deal of ethos for me, because all the tools and all the materials are all there, all the old knives that were used to cut the moldings. This is really the DNA of the history of frames. And at the turn of the century, there was a arts and crafts revival in Boston, and they said, isn't it typical of Bostonians to want to revive things? And so the mill served many frame makers and cabinet makers, and they're continued to develop new and innovative designs. People like Charles Prendergast, a man named Walford Tulin, and the most famous was Herman Dudley Murphy, who was a painter who started something called the Carrig-Rohain Shop in Winchester in 1903, actually a little earlier than that. But in Winchester, they became so popular, they moved the shop down to Copley Square, and eventually the Vos Galleries acquired the shop and closed in 1940, right before the Second World War, is when they shut it down. They continued to operate, and no doubt using the Old Schwamb Mill moldings along the way. So it's an important center for frame study. And my studio is developing a little bit of character like the Old Schwamb Mill. I keep thinking, and maybe it was why, you know, in the back of my mind, these are the kinds of artifacts I like to collect and keep, and anything old. So I put together a tour of the studio. It's about a 6-minute tour. And I think that's something that we'll be showing you here shortly. And also some techniques in gilding, some water gilding techniques, just a brief survey of it. Another little video, and I'll be around to answer questions. Anybody out there who has questions about gilding, now's the time to speak up. So we should probably start the little film I made on the tour of the studio, if this is an appropriate time.
Okay.
The founder of Gilding Studios. Building is right behind us. I'd like to give you a tour of the building, so come on, follow me. And some of the examples of pieces that we've made, you'll see right here is a example from the Society of the Cincinnati that was a certificate of Lars Anderson, who was on the boat with Washington right here, crossing the Delaware. So he was one of the individuals on the actual bark with Washington. And our building is next door to the Society of the Cincinnati. And here is a photograph that they gave me of the building that was being built in 1903 by Evelyn Walsh McLean. And here are all the workers who built our building, and our building is right here. So Evelyn Walsh McLean had the Hope Diamond, and they spared nothing in making this building. So come on, let me give you an idea of what's involved. Here's the first floor. Follow me. We do many of our big projects. Here's a Venetian lantern that we're working on, some big mirror that we're making, and other mirrors that are part of the collection. That mirror in the center has tobacco leaves on it, and it was owned by General Grant, and then President Grant lived in Georgetown. Has a label from Philadelphia on the back of the frame of James Earl's Gallery. Likely from the workshop of William Rock, who was the co-founder of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, along with Charles Wilson Peale. And these were installed in a house in Washington that was the first Secretary of the Navy's. And he had a group of Italian carvers, and this is Aesop's Fables, Renaissance revival really in the 18th century, probably carved in the 1760s in Philadelphia. This would have been gilded. This would have been painted green in the background like a Wedgwood sculpture, and this would have been gray to resemble. This is a frame that came off of a Monet. On the label in the back is from Durand-Ruel, and it lists Monet as the artist. And this was something that we reproduced for. And this is a frame off of a Rembrandt that a client had consigned to me. It was a Rembrandt self-portrait, and it was just too big for his house. This is what we call the second great room. This particular frame came from the Italian embassy, and it is from the collection of Victor Emmanuel III, the King of Italy, who was deposed in 1946. And they sold the building and abandoned this frame, and now it's part of the collection of the College of William and Mary down here. So follow me down into the hallway, and you can see how we have a lot of different types of frames. This is a Tabernacle Frame that was designed by Stanford White, and we had it reproduced. It's made from a wood simulated polymer, and it is a fabulous Renaissance revival example from the late 19th century. Here we have a frame from man named Theodore Voorhees, who lived in Japan in 1885. And so I hang inside of it a Japanese frame from the 19th century with the dragons surrounding it. And inside that, a Dutch frame, and in that, an American folk art frame. So come on this way. We have an important frame from the 20th century over here. Behind this, you can see a frame that came out of the World Trade Center. And this was designed by Warren Plattner, who was an architect and lived in New Haven, Connecticut. And he told me he considered this frame to be the epitome of the World Trade Center. I acquired it after 1995, and then, of course, the rest is history. This is a frame designed by Stanford White. By chance, it has a painting in it of Alexander Harrison's The Wave. And the design on the inside edge is from the sale of the Dow, which is a family crest of the Ruchelai family from Rimini. And it's a very historic frame, and it's a reproduction. The original is at the College of William Adair. These corner samples are from a very important frame-making concern called the Newcomb and Macklin Company. And these were a donation to the Institute for Frame Study from Carl Krentz's kids, Mark Krentz, and they wanted us to have them for the future of frame studies. So it's a very important archive that we're developing here. And you might wonder what this door is. This is one of my art projects I call the Golden Door to Infinity. And I take abandoned doors and I gold leaf them, and I put them in historic spots, like this went to Normandy, and on the D-Day celebration at Gold Beach, it was a remarkable event where people wrote on the doors as well. So I've gone on to gild a number of other doors, but that's another story. For watching this seminar, and I invite all of you to come visit Goldie Studios at some point in the future. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for watching. Are there any questions about the studio? Anybody?
Is there an organization that is the studio, or what is your role on that?
I am the founder of Goldie Studios, and
Okay.
I'm also the chief cook and bottle washer. So after COVID, the staff has been reduced considerably.
Okay, thank
So
you.
I do a little bit of everything.
And people come to you for restoration or reproduction?
Yes, and for advice on proper framing. I work a lot with museums and private collectors. And just the average person who has something from the family, they bring it in, they don't know what to do with it. So I help them out.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to folks too, you can also type your questions into the chat. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. So if you want, you can do that, or you can raise your hand and we can see you.
It seems like your studio is both a working studio and also basically a frame museum in a way. Is that correct?
That's right. It's often been called a frame museum. And ultimately, I hope that will be its disposition. Many of the frames that I've collected are not terribly valuable per se. That's why I've been able to collect them. But they're historically important. And I make drawings of the frames and I study them. And just to give you an example, I bought a frame because it had horseshoes on it. I didn't even think of the print that was in it. Well, it turned out to be the print was pretty valuable. It was Andrew Jackson sculpture in front of the White House, and it was a subscription print used to raise money for the sculptor. And every job like this leads me down this rabbit hole. The sculptor Clark Mills, it was the first equestrian sculpture on two legs, and he failed. The horse, after it was cast on the spot in front of the White House, that's where they cast it. They got it out and it broke, it fell over. So the newspaper account said that the artist was going to throw himself into the Potomac River. So his friend Charles Fendrick made this print and raised money, private money, so that it would be cast again. And the second time it was cast, I was told by the granddaughter of the man who lent the horse, one of those white horses that goes up on two legs, as German horses. Her grandfather owned the DC Transit, which was the bus company pulled by horses. So she told me how the second sculpture was successful because he actually used the horse from her grandfather. Now, all that is from buying a frame with horseshoes on it. So you can see that it's a little infectious with every turn you take. Recently, I made a frame for a very important copy of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. It's going to be exhibited at Duke University this in June. And I had no idea what kind of frame to use. So I went to my collection and there was a frame from the 1860s that said Union and Liberty. And it had an eagle at the top, perched eagle with outstretched wings, and a banner through its mouth that said E pluribus unum. And so I couldn't really think of anything more appropriate for the Emancipation Proclamation than that. So I'm using it as a resource. And so what I hope in the future is that people will use this collection for the same kinds of activities.
Say, Bill, there's a question here from one of our friends, Stroker. Does your gallery have a public education component? And would that enable you to qualify for 501c3 status?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I do have a educational component. I have a very robust one, or I used to. And I have actually formed a 501c3, but it's not an educational situation like yours. It's simply an archive. It's an archive on the history of frame. So the IRS really put me through the paces to get it. It took me 2.5 years. I had to hire the Washington Area Lawyers for the Arts. And this was in 1992 when I got back from Rome. I was fortunate to win the Rome Prize. And it's the first time I'd been away from the pressures of commerce my entire life, well, since I was about 16. And so I had 6 months in Rome to think about what's important. And I decided that I should establish an archive on the history of frames, because a lot of the stuff I'd gotten from people who were dead, really, at this point, a lot of verbal things, a lot of notes, a lot of videotapes. And so I started collecting it and I put it up on a website, and then the website was pirated by the International Indian Food Service. And that's a long story, but I shut it down and we've now been redeveloping it. And I'm a little more savvy with the nonprofit side of it. But in terms of education components, I give lectures, I give workshops on frame making. And it's one of the things that would really be nice to do for the Schwamb Mill at some point. There's a lot of good gilders up in Boston. And one friend of mine, Sue Jackson, has been a gilder there for many years, and her daughter works in the field. She'd be the perfect person to lead a gilding workshop if she's interested there, as she lives out in, I believe, Cotuit now. So there's so many things online now. I have a friend who teaches gilding named Charles Douglas. He has the Gilders Workshop in Seattle. He has a very robust program in education and Zoom meetings. And then there's Sepp Leaf Products in New York, who hosts all kinds of educational things. So, and all over the country, there's people. And the Society of Gilders, which is what we formed. And really, they host a lot of things. So education these days with the internet and YouTube, it's pretty much an open book. But there's nothing like being in a workshop with a master craftsman and watching it being done. You just can't get it all in a Zoom meeting. And there's just too many there's too many things that can go wrong. But also, once you start practicing, those things you experience, and then you get it right, like anything.
Bill, you've anticipated the next question, which is, I'm interested in learning how to gold leaf and silver leaf frames. Any suggestions on how to begin the process in the Boston area?
Well, he's already passed the first hurdle, or he or she, because first you have an interest. Have to have an interest, and that's got to be strong. I would say that I don't know anybody in particular, but there's the Bennett School, which teaches craftsmanship, and they, I believe, had a gilding component at one time. Many of the people don't like to teach gilding. They're afraid they're training the competitors. And I discovered early on after teaching that that really was not the case. In fact, you're really, you're building your own reputation by teaching, by giving the information freely. It's really, Cennini in the 13th century said, if you want to learn gilding, you must first arm yourself with enthusiasm. And some people enter the profession for profit and others for loftiness of spirit. So I guess I'm on the back end of that. I started off thinking it would be very nice to revive this ancient craft, and I'm still learning today. I mean, that's the remarkable thing. There's so much to know.
That might be a good point to segue into the film about gilding that you've prepared for this talk.
Sure.
Demonstration. Actually using silver leaf right now, and I'm putting it on the outer edge of this frame. I've prepared with clay with rabbit skin glue. So I've cut the leaf on this pad. I put a little Vaseline on my hand. Picks up the oil, this tip, which is made from sable. I've cut the leaf. Sometimes it snags a little. There we go. And this is alcohol and water with a little bit of rabbit skin glue in it because it enhances the adhesion with something that's thicker like silver leaf. You don't really need it with gold leaf. Set it right down on while it's wet onto the water, and that's why it's called water gilding. This is for the Old Schwamb Mill gilding demonstration. So here's the final product right here. After this is all burnished, toned. Starts off with water gilding like this.
Looks easy, doesn't it? There's a lot to everything, but the main thing is preparing the materials prior to the gilding. The gesso and the clay, all of that's mixed according to ancient formulas. And then the burnishing of the gold is one of the final stages. And then it's toned. And toning the gold leaf is really one of the critical parts of the final product. You rub the gold so that the clay comes through a little bit, keys in with the painting. And these are all standard things that frame makers know in the craft. The frame makers like Wilfred Tulin and Charles Prendergast, all these guys learned the time-honored traditions from Europe and brought them with them here.
If you could say a word about those frame makers and your knowledge of them in the Boston area.
Sure. Well, I had seen a number of frames with a carved signature on the back that said Carrig Rohain. I had no idea what it meant. And it led me to Boston, to the Fine Art Society there, to the MFA library. And I soon discovered this famous shop, Carrig Rohain, means red rock in Welsh, was started by Herman Dudley Murphy, who was an Irishman. And it means red rock in Welsh, but also based on a Chinese fine up the Yangtze River, it's where the Red Cliffs were, where all the great art was made. So there's a connection between the Japanese aesthetic cult movement in the 1870s in Boston, people like Will Lowe and John Lafarge. So it makes sense that Herman Dudley Murphy would have chosen Red Rock as the name of his studio. Wilfred Tulin was a woodcarver from Sweden who brought with him great skills. He was trained in Sweden. And then Charles Prendergast was the brother of the more famous painter Maurice Prendergast. But they both reveled in the craft. I met Charles Prendergast's wife, Eugenie, before she died back in 1987. And I asked her a lot of questions about what it was like being a gilder in Boston then. She said they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't really care about money. All they wanted was the right frames for their artwork. And that's what brought Charles Prendergast, Tulin, and Murphy together to form probably one of the most famous frame shops in America. And luckily, the Vos Galleries had donated the archive to the American Archives of Art. So all of you can log onto there and see about 110 photographs of all of their frames. And it's really a rich resource of design. It's fun to look through if you're a frame nerd like me. So those are the main framers. There's also Foster Brothers, which was another manufacturer, but let's just focus on the Schwamb Mill and Tulin. Oh, that's a great ledgers of Wilfred Tulin ordering artwork, ordering moldings. It's so fantastic that you all have got this preserved. I mean, it's interesting. You can see the prices and order number, and the profile drawing, of course, is everything for a frame. That's how we judge a frame from each period, by the profile of the molding.
Profile drawings are, I assume, somehow recorded by the Schwambs when they took the order and wrote it down, whether they had a record or if it was being described to them in some manner.
Well, in this particular drawing, you've got order number on the side, the 1876. That's probably their pattern number. And 28, I don't know what that means, maybe the amount of feet they have left. But these are the dimensions of it. They have 67 feet. So maybe this is just a way to inventory their inventory control. But the profile is everything for a frame.
Yeah, let me just.
I show a profile to somebody, they can't read. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. They're all the knives and the moldings it keeps with it. So you look for the shape of the molding, and there is the knife with it behind it. So then you can take that knife out and mill as much molding as you need. Oh, the cubby's labeled Thulin. Yeah. It'd be nice to have a list of all the artists that used the Schwamb Mill too at some point. But those are frames I'm very familiar with, especially the one on the bottom right. That's one of the classic Thulin profiles. And
Here's a few of them that we photographed for you.
thank you. The one on the left is a colonial profile, or I guess this is the one in the same, isn't it?
Yeah, that's front and back.
Front and back, yeah. Well, that's a scoop profile that would have been typical about the 1820s. So he made not only innovative designs, but classic designs as well for people, historical patterns.
This one was obviously ordered and reordered for well over 10 years.
Oh yeah, well that's a reverse cassetta profile, Italian design, and the panel on the center would be great for doing patterns, design patterns, florals, or you might say geometric patterns from the 30s. He was fond of doing that. So it's got a nice deep and wide rabbet, which every framer appreciates. There's nothing worse than a shallow, skinny rabbet. You can never get it out of square painting to sit right in it. And that's another great one, a reverse profile, we call it. We call it reverse because it's higher at the front and then it slopes backwards, reverse away from the painting. Another nice little colonial one. That's really an 18th century profile. That would have been used on a Smybert or a Wollaston, 1760s kind of print molding, or a Limner painter. Very simple Dutch idea. That's an unusual profile. I believe that's a component of a larger frame, an outer member. It might have had a locking piece that went on top of it. You see that channel?
Yes.
And on the right side, that's probably a two-part molding where something else is set onto the top of it to make it higher. They can't mill it out of one chunk of wood, so it's very expensive to do that, and not very practical because that warps. So we get it down to about, I don't know, 5/4 or something like that, and laminate it together. That's how it's done.
I think here is the Archives of American Art page for Carat Grohing you referred to. For folks
Great.
interested, that's the URL up top. And since this will be recorded, you can check this out when we put the recording up, but we'll also post this on our website too.
Great.
So in the meantime, we've got some more questions.
Yeah.
Let me just stop sharing a second. Are there different gauges, weights, and thicknesses of the gold leaf? And if so, how do you decide which to use for which project?
Excellent question. Yes, there are. The thicker the gold, the more expensive. There's double weight gold, which is 19 grams per 1,000 leaves, 19 to 22 grams. And that's what we use for outdoor projects. For example, the Bullfinch Dome in Boston. I did my first repelling off that dome as a consultant. And up on top of it is traces of the original gold leaf. Now, back then in the 18th century, 19th century, it was all hand beaten. So it lasted a lot longer and was thicker. But today, it's beaten by machine, and it's alloyed with different carats. That was always been alloyed. You have to be careful in buying your gold leaf that you get it from a reputable dealer. You always pay for what you get. If something is cheap, there must be a reason. So we bought different types of leaf from different countries that have been less than adequate. And our very best leaf is from Germany and Italy. And there is one gold beater in the United States called Waring Billmeyer. And Herb Billmeyer was from Chicago. I went out there when I found out that and met with him. and he was pretty much closing up, but his son is continuing the business on a limited basis. But the carat of gold, the amount of silver that's added to the gold will lighten the color. So there's an 18 karat gold, which is greenish, beautiful for some landscapes or portraits. And then there is a 16 karat, which is called pale. I'd show you these, but they don't show up in photographs very well. And you see them in different lights, they change a little bit. But then there's the 22 karat, which is generally what we use for frames, single weight. There's also glass gold, which is when the gold is beaten, it's beaten in a large cutch in a big section, and it's pounded. There's a lot of friction. And in the center of the cutch, this is a sheepskin wrapped piece, is where the most less bruised gold is, because the friction on the top and bottom kind of bruise it a little bit. So when you gild glass, you have to specify that it's for glass. There's a glass gold, and they separate all this out when you buy it. There's surface gilding, which is oil gilding. You put a varnish on, it gets sticky. That's what domes are made from. And some oil gilding is done on frames. But primarily, you have the water gilding as your primary technique for applying frames to picture frames. And that's the ancient Egyptian one. And when we picked the logo for our Society of Gilders, we chose a gold beater's hieroglyph from Egypt. So that was a nice moment in honoring the ancient craft of gold beating. So that's it in a nutshell. I've been to a lot of factories, so if there's any more specific questions, send them along. I hope I can answer.
Yeah, one of our board members, Bob Tanner, actually spent time in Burma, maybe 10 years ago, and traveled pretty extensively in the country. He saw gold beating going on there. But more general, he asked, where does the gold come from? And you mentioned sources for the product, but I'm not sure whether Bob might even mean the sources for the gold itself. But
well, I have some gold from Burma. It's in 1-inch squares, and they sell it to the tourists. And the tourists put it on the Buddhas. If you have a bad toe, you put it on the toe. And it builds up in layers and layers, and then they scrape it all off and melt it down and beat it again and sell it again. So it's a nice pilgrimage event. There's also a gilded rock teetering on the edge of a cliff in Burma that symbolizes, you can pick whatever it symbolizes.
How did gilding first come about? Here's another question. And who was the first person to figure out that they could apply hair-thin sheets of gold to a substrate?
Another excellent question. Thank you. Gilding is the world's third oldest profession. It's been around since as long as man has tried to make a better world. And it is Chinese in origin. I always thought it was Egyptian, but at the gold beating factory in Florence of Manetti's, they claim it came from the Orient and not Egypt. That the Chinese were the first to figure this out, how to beat gold into thin sheets. And
we encourage people, by all means, put any more questions that you've got into the comment section. But also, if there's anyone who simply wants to raise their hand and bring a question up, feel free to do that. Looks like we have one from Martha Whitman. I think, Martha, you need to unmute. Okay. Nope. I misread the signal. I do know that we have some frames that people sent in beforehand that they wanted to present for your analysis or comments about their possible sources. And I can share some of those with you now, Bill, if you like.
Sure.
All right. Yeah, here's one. And let me know if you can see it. It should be a sort of a Madonna and child.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. Yeah, that's Raphael's Madonna with the green chair. And it's a very often reproduced piece. The frame is Florentine from the 1920s. And it's basically a replica of a frame from the Renaissance. But it's made for the tourist trade. It has some sgraffito on it. It's carved wood. It's a beautiful frame. And it's water gilded. So I would say it's Florence, turn of the century up to maybe 1920.
And what kind of maybe you can let us know, what is that sort of frame called where you've got a square frame, but an oval sight or a round sight in it?
It's called a spandrel. The oval insert or circular insert is called a spandrel. And the corners of that is called the extrados area of the spandrel. And that's usually where the ornamentation is placed. In this case, it's just a sgraffito design, a scroll. It's a nice design that relates to the frame.
And was this a common thing for people to get in the late 19th, early 20th century? A lot of times people have frames with this sort of artwork in it, and also even more elaborate frames and gilded that, you know, have been in people's homes maybe for 100 years or so in the Boston area, maybe even longer. And, you know, a lot of times it's the origins aren't really clear to people who own them now.
Yeah, that's why it's fun to look at this. This is most likely something that was bought as a tourist and brought back from Florence. There were factories making this for people, you know, making the grand tour. And this is a painting that's in the Uffizi, very often reproduced in the 19th century as well, much more elaborately. I can't tell you how many I've seen like this, but the tondo form, the circular form, is meant to be placed, you know, so it's like an eyeball, you know, it's like something you view through. It's like looking through a keyhole, and it provides a sense of intimacy for someone. And frames that are just circular frames, or tondo we call them, were hung in the pediment of a roof of a room, a bedroom. And people would go to sleep gazing upon the Madonna and Child to incite better psychological harmony in their dreams, I think. Someone told me that if you were dying, you would lay and stare at the Madonna so that she would welcome you to heaven. So there's a lot of things like this. But the circular format, again, the original portraits in ancient times were circles. And they were portraits that were carried with people as mementos. And they called them, in Roman times, they called them imaginem cliptae, or images and wax. And they would have shrines in their homes where these would be. So it's honoring your ancestors. And the small pieces, the little icons, are actually circular icons carried into battle by Russian Orthodox soldiers for protection. They really felt that the Madonna would protect them from harm. So the circle has a long history in terms of imagery, and here it is yet again.
Okay, I think we have another one. I'm just frozen here for a second, looks like.
Well, the shell in the corner is beautiful, and the leaf goes out. This is such a classic frame form. We see it in American frames too. Everywhere out in the, there's an artist named Irving Kaus who carved frames in centers and corners. That's the basic DNA of a frame.
Okay, let's move on ahead here. Here's another one, a woman portrait from sometime in the 19th century. I'm going to share that with you now.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. This is a Renaissance revival frame, and some might call it a Rococo revival because of the piercing. Many frames from the late 19th century like this, I would say this is about 1860s, 70s, maybe 1850s, I don't know. Second half of the 19th century. They combined many styles. So this is a hybrid. And with the flowers at the top and the scroll all fit into the interior architecture of the room. You'd have a mirror like the one I showed in my studio tour, the General Grant mirror. Big piercing, ominous things like this. But you had 12-foot ceilings. You know, it could handle it. This particular frame is covered with bronze paint, and you can see the wire on the upper left side. That's the armature used to hold it together, and that tells us that it's not a carved wood frame. It's a material called compo, or composition. And that is like a bread dough that's pressed into a mold while it's hot, and then it starts to cool and is taken out and set down onto the frame. And in the 19th century, they considered it to be superior to carving. But it certainly was a lot cheaper than carving a frame. And this was meant for many people. An average person could have a great frame thanks to these innovative manufacturing techniques. Most likely this oval carcass was, if it's from Boston, may have been actually turned by the Schwamb brothers.
Could be. We've looked into many times the possible competitors to the Schwambs, and there were a lot of frame makers in Massachusetts at the time, including the Boston area.
Yeah. Well, I like the portrait very much. She's a bit dour, but it's nice to see that she's kept her original frame.
Okay. I'm going to try a different technique for sharing, I think, this time. Yeah, I think if I start from here. Here's another one.
Oh yeah, this is what you might call a federal mirror, Constitution mirror, they called them. Made a lot in the Connecticut River Valley. It's also referred to as a pier mirror. It would be hung between two windows, so the light would go in your face. But it's a nice aigle-mise panel at the top, which is reverse painting on glass. And this is where you would use that glass weight gold on something like this. So it's applied with gelatin, and then it's scratched through with steel wool and styluses to create the design through the gold. And then you paint the back of it black, and that's how you get that effect. And of course, the border is a beautiful green, which is a celadon green or cupric oxide, typical of the rooms that were painted with this same precipitate of copper. The Mount Vernon dining room has the same color. So you can see how maybe why this was green. So it connected to the green wall, an integration of design.
Here's another.
Well, this is a typical Civil War molding, we call it. It's walnut polished with a silver gilt liner. And you can imagine that it's a lot cheaper using silver. So what they did was put an orange varnish on top of the silver called gamboge and dragon's blood, or we framers have a nickname for it. It's called Mecca. And this varnish is a quick way to turn silver into gold.
And another one here.
Okay, this is the same genre, a portrait, a pair of portraits. Looks like a sea captain and his wife. This looks like about a 5x7, like a daguerreotype side plate. So this would have been a typical photography frame with black and walnut polish, very rich and very strong. Very Yankee, no nonsense kind of frame. Well, you try to stump the professor here. I believe this is a manufactured molding
Yeah,
from the 20th century.
yeah.
It's made from something called Schwamb leaf, which is the factory dregs. When you have the leaf, the brass leaf like this is made in 5 by 7 inch squares, rectangles. And what's left over in the manufacturing all goes to the floor. So they gather this up and use it as a kind of a broken leaf. It's very effective. It looks to be a embossed molding to a wheel would have pressed the design in.
How often was that done where a wheel pressed a design into a frame, and who would do it? Because I've seen some frames that were for a photographer in New Hampshire who bought his frames from the Schwambs, but I noticed they had those kind of repeating designs in them when I found them in antique stores.
Yeah.
Of course, it doesn't mean we produce those moldings, but would he have done that himself after he got the moldings from the Schwambs?
No, this is a completely different manufacturing process. And the wheels are made from a cast brass or bronze, and they're heated with torches. And the molding is fed through it on a roller beneath it. So it's just basically like printing money. You know, you don't have to touch the design. You just run it through there. It burns and compresses the design into the wood, and then it's finished after that with no handwork.
So it's the kind of thing that the framer would have done rather than the manufacturer of the molding.
Well, the manufacturer, I mean, this is an elaborate setup to emboss this wood. So you do it in lengths and you sell that wood either finished or unfinished. Most likely they did the finishing because framers weren't equipped to finish their own frames. Most 90% of them.
Yeah, interesting. So it's possible then that the frames that I saw weren't produced by the Schwambs, or they were. I don't know that we've ever seen any evidence they did that kind of work. So
yeah.
So I think that's the frames that came in for you to comment on.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we have some other questions as well that have come in. Just a second. One from me. If you want to unmute and ask, go ahead.
All right, was that for me? You just went blank for a minute.
Oh yeah, so it looks like this is a question from Miria.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, it's Miriam Stewart. I work at the Harvard Art Museums, and in the early 90s, we had a blast with you when you came and
hi
and did a survey of our drawing frames, and we still rely on you. It's really great to see you. And thanks so much for that. And thanks, we still rely on your information. I'm still there, and I've been thinking recently, I deal with paintings as well as drawings now, but I've been thinking recently about our Dutch ripple frames and wondering, thinking a lot about ebony, which is sort of a charged material right now, and wondering if you have a sense of how many black or Dutch ripple frames are actually ebony that you come across, and are they otherwise? I should also mention, as an aside, we have Allison Jackson, Sue's daughter, as our wonderful part-time frame conservator now too, which is great.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well,
so just a question about Allison is interested in this too. Thank you.
Sure. My light's just burned out. Hold on a second. Let me turn the light on.
These are the special lights we have prepared for the program tonight.
Yeah, I know they've been on too long. They burned out. Well, anyway, here's the normal light. Your question about the ebony, it's fascinating. Many of those Dutch frames were out of exotic woods, not just ebony. They were out of pear wood. There's a wonderful manufacturer in England named John Davies, who has made a career out of this, out of manufacturing ebonized these Dutch dark frames. And recently on Instagram, I found that there's a couple of people who have figured out how to do this and make limited editions of ripples. And so it's it's nice that there's a bit of a revival of this going on. But it's the machine that carves this stuff was illustrated in Moxon's Encyclopedia in 1510. And my professor, my teacher, Paul Levy, spent a year and a half developing a ripple machine, a computerized ripple machine. And he hired a wonderful guy named Victor von Revenflow, a technical guy who toughed it out. And when Paul closed up his workshop, he sent me a whole bunch of wood, and in it were these pieces that he had made. And over the years, we've been able to incorporate these ripple and basket weave patterns. But I think once you get into studying the various ripples, there's probably regional variations that need to be studied. My colleague at the Rijksmuseum has just recently been retired, but he teaches at the Campbell Center. He would be another wonderful person to interview. But anyway, there's lots of information on the Dutch ripple. Did you say that the ebony is endangered and can't be imported? Is that what you're
No, I
implying?
think it's just, there's so many questions about globalism and the use of commodities across the globe that involved nefarious practices or enslavement and those kinds of things. That I just was at a conference that we held about the Dutch 17th century art and slavery, and ebony was brought up in the Dutch interest, and so it's just something that made me think about that. And do any of our Dutch paintings actually have ebony frames, or are they all reproduction?
Well, most likely they do have some ebony, and it's something I think really the big issue is for me is tortoiseshell in this components, because it's illegal to deal in tortoiseshell, and really is. I have some old tortoiseshell that Paul sent me, and he said, I doubt if you'll be able to get much more unless you go out and get the turtle yourself. So, but it's great to know about these techniques, because you boil the turtle shell, and it comes off in thin layers like fingernails, and it's translucent and has markings in it. And so you take that and you steam it and you gold leaf the frame, and you put this tortoiseshell on top of it. So the gold glows from inside the tortoiseshell. It becomes luminous, like the Dutch paintings, like the Vermeers that have this sort of, uncanny luminosity. So the frame with the leaf, the tortoiseshell with the leaf under it is really a tour de force in terms of Dutch frame making. But Miriam, it's great to see you. It reminds me of Bill Robinson, who was your leader there for a while.
That's right. Bill retired. Now he's out in LA.
Oh, good.
And
Well,
so I'll be sure to say that I saw you. We had so much fun with you.
well, we and I remember I played Roman Emperor. Remember, you would bring the frames out, and I'd go thumb up or thumb down.
That's
And there
right.
was one that was brought out that was off of a Degas pastel.
That's right. We still keep that.
And it's a very important frame, because there's only one other one like it that we know, that's at the Ashmolean Museum in London, or in Oxford. And Bill called me and wanted to know what the value of it might be, because you were lending it.
That's right.
I think to Princeton or something, if I'm not mistaken. And I said, well, we know that it's made by the artist, and we know he has his hand in the finishing of it because it's recorded. It's a white frame with little markings and little colors in it. It's really quite special. And I said, if art is sold by the square inch and the painting is 12 million, then this is the most expensive frame in the world. I said, have it reproduced, but keep the original, don't lend it. It's bound to be not appreciated as much as you all do. So it's pretty cool to have known that. Thank you for that survey. And that many other ones stick in my mind too, but our criteria for eliminating was good. Anything that's compo, and you had space problems, really what it was.
Right, we had to unframe things so that we could fit them and move them into a new storage area where more things would be in boxes. And some of you may remember, we used to have big frame sales in the back on our Broadway entrance.
Yeah.
No longer, unfortunately.
Well, the lucky people who got some of those.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about Jerry Cohn too. Have you seen Jerry at all, or?
Jerry is still, we still see her. She comes in and catalogs prints, and she's doing a great, she's been a wonderful resource for us.
Well, you tell her that she's the one person who launched my career in the frame study world. After I took that seminar at the Old Schwamb Mill, I was never the same.
And she's a fellow Arlingtonian too, so that's great.
Oh,
I'll
really?
tell her.
Okay, good.
And we have a question again from one of our viewers right here. I just purchased a photo by Vittorio Sella, circa 1890, who was the father of mountain photography. What would be an appropriate frame for something like that? The collodion print is 11 by 15 inches. Obviously, you won't see it, but.
No, that's pretty easy question to field. You want to look at the work of Edward Curtis. He did a lot of these gold types and various stuff, and his frames were what we call finished in burnishing bronze, which is a bronze powder suspended in glue and alcohol and put on the frame, the prepared frame, instead of gold leaf. And the Art Nouveau influence was great at that point, where you have stylized leaves, not real elaborate leaves, but somewhat reduced in form. And it toned with an asphaltum glaze. And these were rich and luminous and did not interfere with viewing the photograph, which they treated like works of art. So I would recommend to this questioner to get the book from Taschen on the photo works, I believe it's called, by Stieglitz. And in the it's a compilation of his magazine that was done at the turn of the century. And the very first article in it talks about fine art photography and frames. So you could read that and you'll be able to find the right solution for that photo. Sounds pretty cool.
We have another question here. I often see old frames in antique stores and also flea markets, often for very, very little money. What are these? What is a way to pick out one which is truly unique or truly is well made?
That's a loaded question. I don't really know how to answer that one. I'm kind of I would say you pick out what appeals to you and what you can use. I mean, you can look for labels on the back. That's always fun. Condition is really important. Things in good condition. I think your taste will lead you in the right direction.
I have a question myself too. When this maybe relates a little more to what was being discussed earlier about the collection of materials and records, also the study of be able to comment on this. It seems to me that oftentimes the framing of something has a lot to do with discussions of an artwork's provenance or its ownership, or obviously how it was displayed and viewed at different times.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, also with its history and its connection with the artist. And perhaps you could elaborate on that, in addition to just the fact that frame makers and gilders and so on are interested in frames in themselves. How do you see them as relating to art and the history of art?
Well, I always look at the back of a frame on a painting. That's where the rubber meets the road. It tells you the information. Sometimes there's little incidental things, an address, that can be compared, a label, the way the corners are joined. All this leads us to very important information about the provenance of a painting. I get a painting and I can identify the period of the painting because the frame is within my realm of knowledge. So it's useful that way, and very practical to have a knowledge of frames. In my book, The Frame in America, which had gone into its 7th printing, it's now available on a Blurb or something. People have told me over the years how useful that book was in identifying paintings. They'd look at the frame and go, oh, look, here's one from the 1830s. That must be when this painting was done to my great-great-grandfather. So it's satisfying to know that this work that I did so long ago is still being used by people to identify paintings.
We have a question. Can you introduce your friend standing behind you with the globe?
Yes, that is Miss Singapore. I pulled her out of the trash and next door in the building at the beginning of COVID. And I didn't know who it was until the Singapore ambassador walked in and shrieked. The Singapore ambassador's wife knew this woman. The Singapore embassy is not far from my studio. And so she's been a great comfort in the loneliness of the last year, holding the world, knowing that it's going to be a better world someday.
And if there's any other questions, I'm looking to see, I don't see any more in the chat. Feel free to raise your hands or unmute. That looks like it for this evening, I guess. I think, Bill, I know that Ed and Janet would like to thank you for the talk tonight, and I'm sure everyone else really enjoyed it, especially because of the connection with the mill. And we're glad to count you as one of our clients as well as a supporter and friend.
Yes.
And we do hope to see you very soon for a live event.
Thank you.
And as we go through materials that Patricia left us, I think I've mentioned, we do have materials from the conference that she put on with your help. I think later, possibly.
Yeah, much later. Yeah.
In the 1980s or 90s?
Yeah, I think it was in the late 80s that we put that together. It was a hiccup, basically, of a larger show. And we sent it there and was displayed. It was very well received. It was a Frame in America.
Well, this discussion from tonight is going to be continued, we know, in the coming months, if we're lucky, and certainly in the next year or two. Ed, do you have any closing remarks on the upcoming events at the mill?
Yes, on Thursday, May 13th at 7 p.m., we're going to have Dr. Robert Krim of the Entrepreneurs and Innovators Center at Framingham State University He is the co-author of a new book with Alan Earls, who has written about high-tech innovations for over 30 years. And it's about their new book, Boston Made from Revolution to Robotics. So it's going to be everything from abolitionism to the invention of the telephone, to the first organ transplant, to as recently as late last year with the one of the COVID vaccines being created in Cambridge at Moderna. So it's gonna, and it's a talk that's going to show why Boston is the leading center for innovation in the nation and up there globally. So they're great speakers, and it's going to be a very exciting talk, and I hope you can all join us. Thank you.
And Bill, I'll thank you one more time. Also, just from one of our listeners, anxious to know the name of your book again.
It's called The Frame in America, 1700 to 1900, a survey of styles and fabrication techniques.
And you think it's available?
It's available from Blurb. It's an online service. But one of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to send you all a case of 30 of them. Okay, they come in a box of 30. And I'd like for you all to have them for your clients. And I'm going to send them to you next week. So send them right to the mill.
Great.
You can use the 30, and in your whoever wants one can get it from you guys. Okay.
That's wonderful.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
And so we'll be seeing all you folks again soon, and Bill will as well again soon.
Thanks. It's been fun.
And hopefully see folks at our next talk.
Thank you, Bill.
Great. Bye.
Bill.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bill.
See you, Miriam.